Hi everybody, I'm Fran Spielman, and with me again for a return engagement, David Axelrod. Thank you so much for joining us.
You know, I enjoyed myself so much the last time, I just couldn't wait to get back.
You had to come back, and we had to check how you did, by the way.
Yes.
Have you ever seen anything quite like this?
No, I don't think there has been anything quite like this in the annals of Chicago mayoral history. Generally, you have, clear front runners, and certainly not a field this large. This is the most unfathomable race for Chicago mayor in my lifetime.
Yeah, it has defied logic on so many fronts. First, Rahm deciding not to run, even though I thought he wouldn't and you thought he wouldn't, but most people thought he would. And then the field didn't get narrowed.
Yeah.
And then the bombshell. Burke, his office was raided, and then he's charged.
Mm-hmm.
Who has been hurt most by the scandal, the extraordinary scandal that includes Danny Solis wearing a wire?
Well, I mean, you'd have to say Toni Preckwinkle, because she was the one who had the fundraiser and had to return the money. But there was collateral damage to Mendoza, I think, who was married in the Burke home and had her own contributions that she had to return. Maybe Chico was touched by it a little because he was viewed as a Burke guy, although I think somehow a little less than the others. But it really became a central issue for weeks in this campaign that nobody anticipated.
And Daley brokered the deal that restored Burke to finance in '89 after Burke threatened to run for mayor, did run briefly, and then got out.
Yeah, I'd say that he, but that you are, as the sort of resident City Hall historian, remembers that most Chicago voters don't.
So he's lucky.
I think he was
way.
less touched by this than others.
How has he remained above the fray somehow? Is it because he's running a rose garden strategy and avoiding the debate that had the higher candidates in the field?
People criticized him for that, but just through the shrewd political calculus lens, I don't know how much damage he took from not showing up there, and he did get in with the second group. It was probably a less contentious debate. It was a less watched debate. And so, through that lens, you would argue, well, maybe that was a smart political move.
But the two newspapers, dramatically different views. Our endorsement in an eloquently written one by Tom McNamee for Lori Lightfoot, making the case that there are these two Chicagos and they're sick and tired of it. I mean, this neighborhood that we are in right now is booming a couple blocks west. No.
Yes.
And the Tribune for Bill Daley. Is that going to matter at all?
Everything's going to matter because the race is so marginal. I mean, you look at these public polls, and I think private polls echo this. You have a point or two separating 4 or 5 candidates. So anything that gives you an edge, I think the fact that Bill Daley has more money than the others and to run his advertising and fuel a field operation and so on could be decisive. The newspaper endorsements, though they don't carry the same influence that they did years ago, if they make a point or two difference, that could be decisive in the race. So I think the reason this is so hard to read is that there are many different factors. The union endorsements of Toni Preckwinkle, and obviously those came with big resources, also bespeaks a certain field capacity just in mobilizing their own members that could be very helpful to her. There are a lot of factors at play in this race right now.
And then you have the operating engineers spending $750,000 to malign Bill Daley and call him anti-working man.
Yeah, there are two ways to look at it if you're Bill Daley. One is, Mario Cuomo once said, nobody ever shoots backwards in cowboy movies. So it means you're in the front, right? You're in the lead. You're one of the front runners. But people are just tuning into the race right now, and he has a strategic decision to make. What do you do with that ad? Do you respond to it? Do you try and overwhelm it with your own positive advertising? He's going to have to make a tough calculation.
And he's sending Valentines to women. According to Mark Brown, his wife got a Valentine from Bill Daley. Boy, he's got a lot of money to send Valentine cards to female voters.
Or maybe he just has affection for Mark's wife, Hanky.
I doubt it. I don't think she's the only woman. Does it surprise you that Bill Daley has managed to avoid the tar and feathering of the Daley years, and particularly the scandals that plagued his brother?
Well, when I saw you last time, I said that the Daley name was a blessing and a burden. And, I'm sure there are some voters who will gravitate to him because the Daley name represents a certain solidity in their minds. And, with older voters, I think it'll be a big advantage. Or potentially a big advantage with some of those voters. And then, there are accumulated nicks and bruises of those years that also assigned to him. No one has really, Mendoza and Preckwinkle were engaged in back and forth for many, many weeks. And no one was taking shots at Bill Daley. And so, he has benefited from this large field, and run a pretty smart campaign, I think.
Right, but he's managed to be somewhat impatient about the questions about the past.
Mostly with you.
Mostly with me.
Yes.
And he's using a line that I had a laugh. I saw Jonathan Taves use in a Chevy commercial where he said that the windshield is bigger than the rear view mirror, and Bill just lo and behold repeated that. I think there's some plagiarism going on somewhere.
But nobody can argue the point, right? It is bigger.
That's right, but is it enough to just say, oh, I don't want to talk about the past? I'm tired of talking about the past.
Well, a general election is going to be a little bit more exacting, and I'm sure he'll get those questions. But I do think that people are concerned about the future, and the real challenge for both candidates, whoever emerges, and if he's one of them, he'll have to face this, is people are going to begin to really scrutinize what they're saying about the future. I will say this, he has, alone among the candidates, been pretty outspoken about the need for pension reform and his willingness to take that on. He's been willing to he's taken a position against an elected school board, and there are a lot of people who fear what an elected school board would mean in terms of the dominance of the teachers' union, essentially electing a board and then negotiating with themselves. And those are not easy positions to take. I think an elected school board is probably a popular view. Certainly, people have mixed feelings about pensions, and so, in that sense, he has broken from the field and deserves some credit for that. But anyone who gets in, when you have 14 candidates, no one gets the scrutiny that they deserve. Right. And when you get down to 2, it gets much more difficult.
Mendoza has been somewhat surprising in that in a lot of the polls she's not doing that well. Why do you suppose that is?
Part of it is Gary Chico. Gary Chico has run a stronger campaign than people anticipated. He's raised money and he's run some very effective ads, and he is to some degree carving into her base. He's up there in 9-10% in the polls, and some percentage of that vote had been expected to be her vote. I still think that she is in the hunt here. I would not rule her out.
You thought she was going to be in the runoff with
and I was one who, I thought when last we got together, I said at that moment, if the election were today.
So what happened? What happened?
I think Chico happened. That was a big part of it. She was touched a bit by the Burke story.
A lot, and by Solis.
Preckwinkle.
And Madigan, all of it.
And Preckwinkle was going after her on a pretty consistent basis, thinking that she would be a formidable opponent in the general. So she's taken those hits. It's interesting, you know, I think she's been fairly effective in these debates and forums. I wonder sometimes if in her advertising, if, you know, how she comes across in the ads suggests, you know, executive.
Is there a lightweightedness to it?
Yeah, which I think is not really who she is. I mean, you know, she holds her own in these forums and debates on policy questions, but the ads were mostly about personality, you know, and projecting her as an energetic new generation candidate. And it could be that they overshot the runway.
In what way? There's not enough gravitas displayed in the ads?
Yeah, I mean, they're not substantive enough, at least the early ads. And, you know, she is energetic and she is, you know, feisty, and they tried to sell that, but she also, just for reasons of presentation, could also come across as young, maybe not equipped, you know. And again, I don't think that's right, but and I don't know, because I don't have the benefit of research. I don't know how people actually react to these. Perhaps they've tested these ads, but for whatever reason they haven't connected in the way. For example, Chico's ads have connected. He came from low single digits to become a contender in the race. I think those ads have been more effective.
Do you think she comes off as shrill, or is there
I don't know
the
whether
quality of her voice?
Yeah, I mean, the quality of her voice is, and no one can, you can't do anything about that.
Well, you could have surgery.
I guess, but not in time for the runoff.
No, that's true. You wouldn't be able to recuperate.
Yeah. So I think there are presentational questions that that have obscured, you know, genuine assets that she brings to the race.
What about her being weighed down by Burke, Madigan, Solis?
Problem. It's
yeah.
a problem.
Yeah.
You know.
Is she the one that gets hurt the most by all of that?
It's hard to say, because again, Preckwinkle was, you know, most in the crosshairs at the beginning and had, I think, some kind of taciturn exchanges with maybe you and some of the other reporters over it. But that was earlier, and then in the next chapters, Mendoza was more exposed to it. The other thing is, Fran, I don't know how much people are actually paying attention. You look at early voting, and all the indications are that this is going to be an abysmally low voter turnout. And it suggests to me that there isn't a lot of interest in this race.
Why? Why?
Well,
I don't get it. I mean, you and I both covered the Harold Washington election.
Yeah.
You could feel the pulse of
Yes.
that excitement.
It was
in
the most.
streets.
That was one of the most dynamic races that I've ever seen anywhere.
Right.
And
Where
remember,
is that?
but remember. Also, that you had three candidates, all larger than life figures.
Yeah, sure.
Jane Byrne, Rich Daley, Harold Washington. That it was covered as a major event. Remember that I think the television stations had a jointly covered these debates.
You and I were on a panel together at a debate. I
Yes.
remember, and all 3 or 4 of the debates were on TV live.
And you know, I mean,
By all the
viewerships,
channels.
right? And the viewership was enormous. I haven't looked to see what the viewership for the first couple of televised debates were, but I bet you it was minuscule. And of course, television itself is not what it was.
Everybody's on Netflix or whatever they're doing.
It is, but it is bewildering, because these are going to be a very challenging 4 years for the city. You know that better than anyone, because you cover the fiscal condition of the city. You know, we have this ongoing crime and violence problem, and just being mayor of any big city is such a challenge, because cities are fragile. Even great and vibrant cities are fragile, and you're always one incident away, one reversal in a court or a legislative body away from a crisis, and so it really matters who the next mayor is.
Right, and the next mayor, whoever that is going to have their hands full with this city council. How big of a turnover do you think there'll be, and how much difficulty will it create for the mayor?
Well, you know, we know that it's already going to be different because Ed Burke was such a big and significant figure for the last 30 years in the city council running that finance committee. But
so what happens to him? Let's talk about him for a second.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know the ward well enough.
Does he win charged with attempted extortion?
Well, there are two questions. Does he win?
Okay, let's talk about
does it
matter anyway?
Yeah,
okay,
right.
So first let's talk about, does he win? Can he survive
I don't know.
this?
I don't know I don't know the 14th ward well enough to know. We know that it's over 70% Hispanic. One has to believe that the indictment is meaningful to people, but
it's not an indictment yet. That will come later. It's an actual attempted extortion charge.
Charge, yes.
Right, and he's going to be hit with a lot of other counts
Yeah.
after the election.
Yes,
but
yeah.
in this
But
election,
I mean, the point is that the taint of scandal
Sure.
hangs over him in this election. That was already challenging for him because the ward has demographically changed so dramatically. Weighed against that is he has an organization there that has worked it for years and years and years, and
you have two opponents. One of them endorsed by Chuy Garcia.
right.
So does he
So
survive?
I don't know, but again, I'm not sure that it matters because I think the weight of evidence against him seems pretty dramatic. He says he's going to fight it and that he's going to beat it, and maybe he will. But generally, when the federal government moves as aggressively as they have here, they're pretty confident in the evidence they have, and we know from the Solis situation that they have tape here, and tape
They have at least a dozen phone calls that he recorded where movers and shakers sought city actions from Ed Burke.
Right.
So do you think Burke ends up cooperating?
I don't know. That's another question you ask about how much turnover there'll be in the city council. There's an election, and then some members of the city council may face charges later. It is going to be, for sure, a time of change and tumult in the city council.
How much turnover would you say?
I don't know, Fran. You would know better than I, but I think you're going to see a lot of fresh faces, and we know that the city council is designed under the city charter to be a strong body, not subservient to the mayor. Mayors have brought them to heel over generations, and it has become the tradition in Chicago that the mayors dominate the city council. It's going to be interesting to see if that continues, and if it doesn't. We lived through a period in the late 80s when the city council exerted itself, and we had a weak mayor after Harold Washington died and Eugene Sawyer served briefly, and it was
during his time they reasserted themselves.
They did, but that was a little different because he was such a powerful force himself. But
are we likely to see a return to council wars?
It could be council wars. It could be council chaos. It's going to be a real challenge for the next mayor, and I think aldermen themselves. You cover the city council. I only now read your coverage. I'm not there at the city council meetings. It feels as if these members of the city council are beginning to try and exercise their muscle as individual members. We've seen it in cities elsewhere. We saw politicians in New York drive Amazon out of New York, and there is this ferment going on at the grassroots. So it's going to be challenging, and especially because, given the fiscal situation of the city, there's not going to be a lot of emoluments for mayors to hand out to get members of the city council on board.
And then you have
and there's going to
remap.
be there are going to be hard decisions that the city council
Right, and then you have remap at a time of a huge black